Hello and welcome to this episode of The Magnetic Woman Show. I am your host, Lauren Joyce, sex, love, and relationship expert for leaders and influencers and founder of The Magnetic Woman. This is the show for you to learn about what it means to tap into your feminine, how to really unleash your sexiness and create the amazing relationships that you desire in your life. So in this podcast, I cover sex, love, relationships, lifestyles, everything and anything you can think of when it comes to being the most empowered and fullest expression of yourself in the world. So today's episode, I am really excited about, and to be honest, a little bit nervous too. So first and foremost, I want to apologize for not giving you guys podcasts over the last few weeks. So as I'm recording this at the end of June in 2020, I thought that it was really important over the last few weeks that I didn't put content out, as the Black Lives Matter movement here in the United States has become front and center. I'm not even going to say when it started, because let's be real, this is an issue that Black people and people of color have been experiencing for years and years, decades and decades, centuries and centuries. And yet, over the last month, the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States has really taken front and center stage, as it should. Now, I am not an anti-racism educator, and therefore my area of expertise I felt like was not needed in this moment, and quite frankly, it was more important for me to not create content, to sit back, to listen, to learn as much as I could, and to really give space to those people who are doing work in the Black Lives Matter movement, in anti-racism. And again, I just felt like it wouldn't really be authentic, or it wouldn't feel good, quite frankly, if I came out giving you content on feeling sexy or being feminine, when what we all needed to be doing was learning about our own inner bias, inner prejudice, and the racial systems and structures, racist systems and structures that are set up in the world. And so again, I want to apologize that I was not giving you content over the last few weeks, and tell you why, and why I thought it was important for me to hit pause on putting new podcasts out. So today's episode is titled Grief and Turn On. And like I said, I'm a little bit nervous to do this episode, but I feel like it is really important, especially today. So this episode is coming out on Sunday, June 28th, and today marks the 8-year anniversary of my father passing away. So if you listened to my very first episode and you heard about how I became the Magnetic Woman, or you've been following me for any length of time, then you know that the death of my father, losing my dad, was what really sparked and spurred me into the realm of self-development, but more importantly, into the realm of the feminine and sensuality. And so while grief and turn on seem like very odd bedfellows, hopefully by the end of this episode, you will feel more able to handle the grief in your life and more empowered in how you move through things in your life. So again, today marks the 8-year anniversary, which is crazy in a lot of ways. And the last 8 years have been very transformative and transformational. And going back to when my dad died, I was 25 years old and I had no idea how to deal with or handle grief. And I thought part of it was because of my age. I thought a large part of it was because of my age. But as I have done the work that I've done on myself and with clients all over the world over the last 8 years, I've seen that the reality is most people don't know how to grieve. And especially here in the United States, our culture is not one that encourages people to fully grieve. I remember talking to a friend shortly after my father had passed away, and she had lost her mother a few years beforehand. And she said that, she was having a really hard time a few months after the fact, and someone said to her, "How are you still upset? You typically only get 3 days off of work to grieve." Obviously, this was a person who had never experienced a very significant loss, because if you have experienced any kind of significant loss in your life, whatever form that looks like, you know that grief is a long process and it is not linear. But we're not taught how to grieve and how to really grieve in a healthy way. And so there I was, 25 years old, no idea what to do. But I knew within a few weeks of my dad passing away, I only wanted the loss to make me a better person. I did not want this loss to rob me of life, to keep me stuck or stagnant in life. I wanted it to be something that I could look back on and, of course, still be sad, still miss my father, but I could look back upon it and be like, wow, look at who I've become, not even in spite of that, but because of that. So I'm going to repeat that last line because I think it's really important. I think often when we experience a challenge in our life, when we experience loss, grief, any kind of breaking open or breaking apart, there can be this idea or energy of, I'm going to overcome this, or in spite of this. But when we realize that these challenges, these losses, these breaking open and breaking apart are part of what can make us who we are, and we don't become who we are in spite of them, then it takes our own power back in the situation, and we don't give our power away to that loss or to that pain. And so again, 8 years ago, I had no idea how this was going to happen. So I did what I knew to do, which first and foremost was to go to grief counseling, go to grief therapy. I was not living in the city that I grew up in. I was living in the city that I went to college in, and I didn't have a very strong support system there. And so I knew that I was going to need something to lean on. So I found a grief therapist, grief counselor, and I started to attend grief therapy because, again, I had no idea what to do. And again, I thought I was alone in this experience of having no idea how to grieve, when in reality, most people have no idea how to grieve, especially here in the United States. Because we, especially in the US, are so focused on production and action and doing and constantly being in motion and in movement. Then you wrap all of this up in the patriarchal system and society that we've been under for thousands of years, which really perpetuates this very unhealthy narrative of work, 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 work. Your worth is wrapped up in what you do and what you produce. And emotions have no place in this. And there's not a focus or a realization of the life cycle. And I don't just mean a person's physical life cycle, but I mean life cycles or cycles in general. Like, as a person, as a woman, me, myself, I have gone through many death and rebirth processes in my life. In, yes, losing my father, losing relationships, losing friendships, but also in being in this realm of self-development, in coaching, in constantly learning and growing, losing parts of myself or grieving, right, stages of my life being over. And until you can get really good at grieving, life is going to feel very heavy and burdensome. Because when you realize, and this is a belief that it took me a very long time to lock into, but it is a core belief of mine. So if you hear me say this and you're like, Lauren, there is no way in hell that I'm on this train with you and believe that, I get it. Like, I didn't believe it at the beginning either, because it was very painful to believe this, but now it's a core belief of mine. And that is, everything is happening for me and not to me. So one more time for the people in the back. Everything is happening for me and not to me. Now, of course, when I first heard this, it was probably within a year after my dad passing away. And I was like, there is no way that this loss that has me bawling on my knees every single day in more pain than I've ever experienced in my life, there's no way that this is happening for me. Like, this is happening to me. And yes, it does happen to you. You get to have your human experience. And again, once you learn how to grieve in a healthy way, first and foremost, that means giving yourself permission to grieve, to fully grieve, to fully break apart, right? None of this like semi breaking apart and then being like, well, I should be over it, or it's time to move on. No. And especially if you have lost someone or something very important to you, I don't know that there's really ever a way that you, quote, move on, as if you just kind of leave it all behind and it never comes up. It doesn't impact you in any way, shape, or form. No, right? And so again, giving yourself permission to fully grieve, giving yourself permission to fall apart. But that is so challenging for most people because there's this fear that if I fully fall apart, I will never be able to put myself back together again. If I fully feel this pain, I will never get out on the other side and I will be stuck here. That's what I felt. I was like, okay, I'll go to grief therapy and I'll kind of like do a little bit of this work and then hopefully get to like sidestep the rest of it and not really feel the depth of it. And with enough time, like it'll scab over and I'll be okay. No, that's not how it works at all. So there I was in grief therapy, and just having my feelings and experience validated was really important for me. And then probably about 6 months later, I found myself, as many of you know, in a program that was all about a woman living a pleasurable life. Now, this was Regina Thomashauer's mastery program when she was doing it in person, and this was 7 years ago at this point. And I remember signing up for this program hoping that basically I would be given permission to spiritually bypass all the grief, that I could go straight into enjoying life, straight into pleasure, straight into like being this woman who was radiant and sexy, and, you know, seeing Regina and all the women that had gone through her program, like, oh, I want to feel like that powerful. And if I just kind of sidestep this grief and go straight into that, then I'll be good, right? And that'll just kind of fix itself. But what I found in her program, and quite frankly, I don't know where I would be today without Regina's work and that initiation, because that's truly what it was, initiation into my connection with my feminine, and more importantly, my connection with pussy. So what I learned in that is, in order for a woman to fully reach this height of power and turn on and aliveness in her life, she's to fully be able to break open and break apart. And that was terrifying for me because I had not seen women in my life do this, right? It was all about like keeping it together, keep moving forward. You know, your doing is your sense of worth. So if you're not doing, then like you're not worthy. And what I found in this container, what I found with the feminine, was that we have to learn how to fully break apart, how to fully grieve, and quite frankly, how to fully feel all of our emotions. And this goes for men and women. So I talk about this from the vein of the feminine and feminine energy and my connection to myself and my body as a woman. And this goes for men and women, because men have emotions too, as much as they might think that they don't, or as much as culture and society has tried to tell them that they don't, they do. So being able to fully grieve, fully rage, fully unleash your sense of despair and anger. So the degree to which you can go fully into what people call your darkness, but I hate using that word because there's very much this like negative connotation that those things aren't okay or are less than our joy, our bliss, our happiness. And I don't see that at all. So I call them heavier emotions because they feel heavier in the body. When you're walking around in a sense of grieving or with despair or rage or anger, there's a heaviness somatically in your body. And so it's only to the degree to which you can fully express those that you can also fully allow yourself to express your joy, your bliss, your happiness. And all of that in and of itself is powerful and beneficial, right? If you get nothing else from this episode, I want you to get the permission to grieve, the permission to feel all of your emotions to their fullest. And you will never be stuck in that grief or in that despair. Now, will it take a while, especially if you've just lost someone or something? Yes, but the more proficient that you get at acknowledging your emotions and allowing yourself to feel them, and more importantly, allowing yourself to grieve, the quicker you end up cycling up, right? So again, coming back to the belief that I have, which is everything happens for me and not to me. So when you grieve the loss of a job and fully let yourself grieve that, fully let yourself feel the fear, the anxiety, the despair, the frustration, you're much more quicker to get to a place of, you know, I've been wanting to get out of that job for a really long time. I wasn't happy. So how is this happening for me? You cannot spiritually bypass, emotionally bypass that grief and then just get to, oh, this is happening for me, right? When I went through a breakup, it was like I had to fully feel, fully grieve that before I could fully get to a space of this is happening for me and how is this happening for me. All along, that mentality was guiding me as I was allowing myself to fully fall apart, to scream and cry all day if I needed to allow myself to fully break open. Now, for most people, the fear of fully grieving, the fear of fully going there also comes from you don't really want to do it alone. And yet, because most people are not comfortable with their own grief, their own anger, their own sadness, their own ability to fall apart, they can't hold the space for others. So one of the things in the coaching that I do with women, with the programs that I run, there is this huge emphasis on, as we get to a space of like lots of grief coming up and really feeling the unfelt grief of basically their entire lives, it's vitally important to feel like you're also being held and loved and seen in that grief. So that's why group programs are really important. That's why therapy or coaching is usually very helpful. And or just having a really incredible support system or community that you know you can go to and fall apart. So again, all of this is great. But here to me is what really allowed me to become who I am because of what I went through, not in spite of it. And that was allowing turn on and sensuality to meet me in my grief, allowing turn on and sensuality to be a part of my grief. Now, again, these might seem like very strange bedfellows, But think about it. If you're allowing yourself to fully go there, to fully grieve, to fully express that part of who you are, you can also begin to allow yourself to fully go there in the sensuality, in the somatic experience of being a human. And so what does it look like to bring turn on to grief? Well, in my programs and when I work with women, I teach them what I call emotional mastery tools. So these are tools and practices to help you move the emotions through your body, move them out of your body. And in all of those practices, I pair them with pleasure-based, turned on practices. So grief does not have to be this place or space where it is just darkness, but sprinkling in, maybe after you allow yourself to cry all day, taking a bath and putting on something that makes you feel maybe even sexy, but if nothing else, loved and comforted, right? So reaching for pleasure, reaching for turn on, even in the depths of grief, when it is the hardest to reach for, that's when we need it the most. And again, what it did for me and what I see it do for so many of the women that I work with across the globe is it allows you to feel a sense of power and a sense of kind of control over what is happening. Because again, our mind is trying to make sense of what is going on, what is causing all of this pain. And grief, it's nonsensical, right? It's not linear. It doesn't make sense often. You could be completely fine and see something or have a memory, and then the rest of your day, all you want to do is cry in bed, and allowing yourself to cry in bed. So again, when we get out of a space of inner conflict and inner shoulding of ourselves, like we shouldn't be feeling this way, we should be at a different point, we should be moving on by now. When you come into a space of like, today is really fucking hard, and that's okay, and I love myself even though it's really fucking hard. One, I find that tends to shorten the time that you feel that really fucking hardness. And two, it allows you to then be like, what would turn me on right now? And here's the thing with this idea of turn on. Turn on is not this, it is not always sexual turn on, where what would turn me on so that I feel like I want to have sex. That's not turn on. Turn on is, to me, this sense, this spark of aliveness, this sense of a little bit of excitement, right? And again, when you're grieving or in grief, you're like, well, nothing is exciting, right? But would it be pleasurable and would it like turn you on if you got a delicious cup of your favorite soup or mac and cheese and you just like ate it slowly and thought of how every bite was nourishing and comforting your soul right now? That is turn on. And again, what I found is when I paired grief and turn on, when I was given permission to fully break open and break apart, and when I was encouraged to use turn on and sensuality in that breaking open, I was remade into essentially the woman that I've always been meant to be, the woman that I've always seen myself to be. And it allowed me to see the gifts, to see the, not even benefits, but to see what I was getting from that process. So I remember, again, 8 years ago, when I first went to my grief therapist, grief counselor, I guess she was more a counselor. And I said to her, I know I'll get to a point someday where I'll look back and be like, I can't imagine my life being any different. And it's not that I don't miss my dad, because I do. And he was, I mean, quite frankly, one of the best humans ever, one of the best men in the world. It's not that I don't miss him, but who I became, the woman that I am today, so much of that is a product of how I navigated the loss, how I learned to grieve, how I then put myself in the realm of self-development and the feminine and sensuality. Like, there's no way I would be a sex and relationship coach right now if my dad hadn't died. And that seems so weird, right? And of course, there are, like, every day, it's like, I wish I could have learned these lessons in a different way. And maybe I could have, who knows? But when you allow yourself to bring turn on and sensuality into grief and into breaking open and breaking apart, you get the lessons, you illuminate parts of yourself that you probably had no idea were there. You feel more of a sense of power and control. And again, the more proficient that you get at grieving, in some ways life becomes easier, not because you never experience anything hard, but because when you experience something hard, you don't feel like it's the end. You're like, wow, this is just another death and rebirth of myself, or of this iteration of my life, or this is another loss for me to grieve, and who am I going to become in the process of this? And so for me, that was how I ended up learning how to grieve, how to break open, how to fall apart. It is what led me to do work around the feminine, sensuality, sexuality, pussy. That loss is what led me to truly find myself in a lot of ways. Now, could I have said that 8 years ago? Definitely not. Could I have said it 6 years ago? Probably not. Maybe even 4, I don't know, right? Like, this is an evolution and a process. And again, no matter where you are in your life, no matter what you've experienced, you have experienced something that has broken you open in some way. Maybe it's been the loss of a person, a relationship, a job, a friendship, whatever it is. Give yourself permission to fully grieve, even if it was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Because until you fully grieve it, it's still just like hanging out there, wanting attention and wanting its rightful respect and grief. And again, that's why even things like friendships or losing of a job, or look, for entrepreneurs, like programs that didn't sell, or moving apartments or whatever, we have lost this connection of really honoring and finding the beauty in endings and beginnings, because we're so over focused on being productive, on working, on defining our sense of worth and worthiness from what we do and how and what we produce in the world, that we've lost this connection to really the feminine element of rituals, of cycles. And so the more comfortable you can become in all parts of the cycle, and especially in the breaking open, because to me, again, I just hear and see so many people afraid to grieve because they're afraid that if they break, they won't be whole again. But the way that I've come to see grief and loss is that what it does is it breaks you open and remakes you in a newer, bigger, more authentic way, in a newer, bigger, more authentic version of yourself. So again, the more comfortable that you get in feeling the grief, the loss, the sadness, and the more readily able to approve of how you feel, it goes such a long way in your baseline level of happiness, contentment in life, and really helps to mitigate, I feel like, a lot of fears around things that you can't really control. Again, I find that for a lot of people, a lot of women especially, because I work mainly with women, the fear of things that you can't control oftentimes comes back to the fact that you don't know how to grieve. You've never given yourself permission to fully fall apart. So it's like, oh God, if this one thing goes wrong that like I have no say over, like, I don't know how I'm going to handle that because I can't really handle a lot of things that have happened in my life and I'm just trying to gloss over them and not really face them head on. And it's not a judgment. It's not a like, I know how to grieve the right way and nobody else does. No, not at all. But I'm just saying from my experience, from what I've found in the work that I've done in the communities I've been a part of and the community that I have created and the work that I've done with women from all over the globe, the more comfortable you get with really being able to grieve and honor the full cycle of death and rebirth and whatever that looks like in your life, the more empowered you feel in life. And the more that you allow yourself to have turn on and sensuality permeate all areas of your life, including the dark emotions, the more connected to your power you feel. And the more grounded and centered you feel, even if you are grieving. So again, I hope this episode was helpful for you, if for no other reason than to give yourself permission to feel how you feel today and every day. Allow yourself to move through them, move through your emotions, and to allow yourself to bring in a sense of pleasure, sensuality, and turn on into all aspects of your life. So if you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to my podcast and leave a comment and a review. And if you want more information from me, make sure to go to themagneticwoman.com. I have 5 free steps on how to step into being the magnetic woman in your own life. All right, my loves, until next week.